Windows Server Cal and RDS Cal. Those people who are in the commercial space wishing to run that multi-point premium server, take note that it is now a role within the Windows Server Data Center or the Windows Server Standard. There is a Windows Server, the Windows Storage Server 2016, which is the OEM product, and then the hypervisor is a free download. So the Windows Server 2016, as mentioned, is moving from a processor license to a core license. The server is going to be now licensed by the number of cores on those physical servers. There is a minimum requirement that you cover 8 cores on those physical processors or 16 cores on that physical server. So the minimum requirement would be 8 of the 2-core packs because each quantity 1 will cover 2 cores. It is also good to note that you need to make sure you are covering all cores if it goes above that 8-core count. And then SA, for customers that are under SA renewal, will be given grants for additional cores as needed with documentation. So processor, if you take note, here are some examples of cores that have 2 cores that now you would have to license that core for 8 of the 2-pack licenses because you have to make sure that each core is covered with 8 cores. Regardless of whether it's a dual core or single core, a dual processor or single processor server, it still requires that 8 2-packs to cover 16 cores on that physical server. If you notice, the 2-core, 4-core, 8-core is pretty much going to stay the same. You're going to need each one of those are going to have to be covered by 8 of the 2-pack cores. When you get to the 10-core, however, that's when you're going to have to change your license count. You're going to have to make sure you cover those extra 2 cores, those extra 4 cores, or what have you. The price for 8 2-pack licensing for Windows Server is equivalent to what the old 2012 quantity 1 that covered 2 processor license structure is. Here's another document that shows you the kind of put it out on a grid for the, if you have so many processors per server, here's 1 processor, 2 processor, 4 processor, and each one of those processors has 2-core, 4-core, 6-core. This kind of explains how you have to license it. These are the 2-core packs. So if I have one server that has 1 processor with 2 cores, I still have to do 8 of the 2-pack licenses to be compliant with Microsoft. And the same thing, if I have 1 server that has 4 processors with 2 cores, I'm going to need a total of 16 of those 2-core pack for those to license that correctly. Here's a renewal scenario for you. For a customer who is renewing Active SA on a 2-processor server with 8 cores on each of those processors. If you take note, the old way of having it, the license would cover the processor base is going to move to the core model. The number of licenses you would have need for the old Windows Server 2016 would have covered those 2 processors. When you move to 2016, you're talking about 8 of the 2-core packs to cover that same physical server. If you notice the renewal cost, it's going to be about the same as what it was in 2012 model. There's absolutely no cost difference between the 2. Now, when you get to our second scenario here, here's a renewal for a physical server with 10 cores. In this case, the old way of licensing the Windows Server 2012, and sorry about that typo, was to license one of the two processor standard license for that physical server, but today you're going to move it to a core base, which will be doing 10 of the 2 core packs of standard core licenses. You'll see that this is where the renewal cost will change a little bit because you need to cover those extra cores that are in those physical processors. So what cost of renewal for the old 2012 way was $224. Because of the extra 2 cores, you're going to look at around $280. This is annualized pricing. Core grants are given for SA renewals for processors that are greater than 8 cores of those machines that are currently covered with SA with documentation. So you will be able to cover all cores with SA only, but you need to make sure you have documentation to prove that those servers has more than 8 cores on those physical processors. A tool that you can use to help you get those documentation is the Microsoft Assets and Planning tool. It's called the MAPS tool. There's the email link at below so that you can run that tool for your end user, and it will show you the processor setup. Now we're going to go into stacking virtualizations. This is a common scenario where a customer has purchased the 2012, in the old 2012 way, the customer has a processor-based license that covers, for standard, it covers two virtual rights. It covers 2 processors and gives them 2 virtual rights. But if they had to do 4 virtual rights, then they would have purchased 2 of the 2 processor packs in the 2012 model. In today's model, and with this scenario being a 10-core processor, you would first license your server for the 2016 model. In the 10-core scenario, that would be 10 of the 2 packs. That would give you the 2 virtual rights, but to give them an extra 2 virtual rights, you would have to double that count. So you would add another 10 2-core packs to give them 2 more virtual rights. Again, this is annual cost comparison here. It would have cost in the old 2012 way $1,040. And now it's going to be around $1,300 to license that system now. There is a calculator available to you. You can download this core calculator, and we'll send you these this web link. This is calculating a server as we had in that last scenario. That has 2 processors that have 10 cores apiece. They're running 4 virtual instances. So the top number is how many processors do you have in that one physical server. The second number is how many cores are within those physical processors. That gives you your number of licenses just to license the regular server for 2 VMs. But if you look down where I have the stacking license, I put in there that I'm running 4 virtual machines off of that same server. So it changes my count that I need to license for that machine to 20 of the 2 packs. So why Windows Server Software Assurance? Windows Server Software Assurance gives you new version upgrade rights, backup disaster recovery. That alone is worth the price of that software assurance. 24/7 problem resolution support for business critical issues. There is spread payment options available for license and software assurance that you can spread over 2 or 3 year terms. Step-ups are available within the open value program only, that you can step up a customer from a standard Windows server to a data center if you find out that that customer has is moving to a highly virtualized environment, it may be good for them to go ahead and step those standards up to Datacenter. And that way, when you go up for renewal, or if you need to do it after renewal, they'll be at that Datacenter level that gives them unlimited virtualization rights. And then the hybrid use benefit of using it with Azure virtual machines, which JJ will cover in our next slide. I'm going to turn this over now to JJ.
Thanks, Carolyn. So, folks, go ahead and build out the whole slide right there, Carolyn, if you don't mind. You know, No, go ahead and build out the whole slide. Yep, thanks. So, folks, thanks for joining the call today, and, we're really excited about Windows Server 2016, and one of the big benefits that I think you're going to appreciate is the fact that Windows Server 2016 was built around the cloud. We were built around Azure. Many of the features and functionalities that you can see in Windows Server actually came from our learning inside of Microsoft Azure. And so with that in mind, we also still realize that there are going to be some of your customers who they've made a heavy investment on premises and they're not yet ready to move to the cloud. But we want to make sure that the operating system that they're running on premises is ready for the cloud when you need them to get to the cloud. And so again, with that in mind, we have created the Azure Hybrid Use benefit. And so basically it adds additional value to what you're doing with Windows Server. And if you're in any way familiar with how Azure works, you're spinning up virtual machines, for example, that are running a Windows Server operating system, there's a cost associated with that compute. If you use the Azure Hybrid Use benefit, you'll find that if you buy a Windows Server license through Tech Data, and you decide then to move that license into Microsoft Azure, you can see cost savings of up to 47%. It, again, depends on the size of the virtual machine that you're going to purchase, but go ahead and show me the next slide here, Carolyn, so I can tell folks a little bit about how this works. But yeah, you will be able to save a ton of money moving into Azure, even though you've made the investment on premises. And here's kind of how. Basically what you see right here is that if I buy an on-premises license for a Windows Server standard box, okay, I have the ability to run that Windows Server license inside of Microsoft Azure. And the way that it's enabled right there is in that middle column, which talks about the fact that I can run 2 instances of up to 8 cores or 1 instance of up to 16 cores inside of Azure. So when you go to Azure.com, you take a look at the calculator and you see the type of machine that you want, all you need to do is size that machine. Right, you take a look and see how many cores you're going to have in that virtual machine, and you're able to run your Windows Server licenses in Azure doing so. Now, the difference between buying Windows Server Standard and Windows Server Datacenter and using this hybrid use benefit is going to be in how you're able to use or not use those licenses simultaneously, both on premises and the cloud. If I buy the Windows Server Standard license, and I use the hybrid use benefit, I have to make a choice. Am I going to now run my Windows Server license in Azure, or am I going to run it on premises? So I have to decide which way I'm going to go. But if I have the Data Center edition, I have the ability to actually run still my full on-premises environment and then also run my Windows Server license in the cloud simultaneously. So you can see that there's a huge benefit to just getting your customers to Data Center immediately. I know that it might be a stretch, right? You're thinking, well, that's so much more expensive, but you've really got to think about the future of where they're going. And as Carolyn mentioned, if you, at the very least, make sure that you're locked in through the open value method of purchasing, Windows servers, and you can step up if you're not ready to make that investment just yet. But just imagine right now, I've got my Windows servers running, and my customers, I finally convinced them, you know what, let's run in a hybrid environment, let's move to the cloud. You've already sold them the Data Center edition. You're going to save a ton of money moving to Azure or running in that hybrid environment. So go ahead and, Carolyn, let's show the last slide of my section here to kind of talk about how that savings actually works. So over here, you're seeing an example of an Azure virtual machine, a D3 instance. That's, if you're not familiar with Azure, that's just the size of kind of the virtual machine, a special configuration of that machine. And annually, the cost for that machine would be about $350, $4,000 for the year to run that machine. And the reason why it's so costly is because not only does it talk about the heavy compute power of that virtual machine, but it also includes the Windows Server license. But if I want to have that same compute power, and I've already bought software assurance that enables me to have the hybrid use benefit on my server, then I pay for the base compute cost, basically a non-licensed version a non-licensed OS version rather of that virtual machine, and I'm only just paying that software assurance. So you can see that I'm almost saving 47% because I no longer have to have that Windows Server license, operating system license again, built into that VM. So huge savings right there. And so I think this is one of the conversations that you're going to have going forward with your customers. They're already talking about Office 365. Now they're talking about their on-premises environment and moving to the cloud. Definitely have the hybrid use benefit conversation, and really that results in all the great software assurance benefits that Carolyn mentioned.
Thank you, JJ. Thank you, JJ. We're going to go ahead at this time and open it up for questions. If you have a question, you can unmute the lines and ask your question to either me or JJ.
Hey everyone, just to kind of smooth things along, this is Tech Data here. We kind of prefer if you guys just use the chat box to drop in your questions, just so JJ can address those questions easily.
And folks, while you're thinking of some questions to ask, or type in that box over there, as Carolyn mentioned, right, when you're looking at all the possible permutations of having virtual machines on a box, you got to keep a couple things in mind, because these are the types of questions that always come up with me. They say, well, I only sometimes run my virtual machines, 3 of them on this one box. Sometimes I only run 2 on this box, but there might be a time where I have to run 7 at one time on one box, but it's not all the time. You've got to look at virtual machines, and the way you calculate that is based on, if I took a snapshot, if someone was auditing your server and they happen to take a snapshot, you're running the most virtual machines you possibly could be running inside of that environment at that time, are you properly licensed? So if you generally only have 2 or 3, but sometimes you're clustering, or sometimes you're doing high availability or failing over, you've got to license all those boxes for the maximum number of VMs that could be on there if a snapshot was taken at that point in time. Right, so then that's again why you have that when you're getting up to this point and thinking about all these virtual machines, it may be the Datacenter edition, for example, that you're going to actually purchase instead, because you're actually going to be running more VMs at some point. I would also say that when you think about stacking all of your virtual machines, when I'm stacking all these virtual machines, I'm thinking, okay, well, what is that kind of break-even point to make me go to the Datacenter edition instead of stacking standard licenses? Well, standard is about 1/7 the cost of a Datacenter license. So generally, the break-even point is when you have 14 virtual machines running on a server at one time. That's generally the sense. Again, you're going to have to do the exact math and find out where that point is. But it's generally 14 machines. So if I even am thinking, if I know for sure I'm going to have 10 virtual machines running on a server at one point, if you can make the leap, if you can get up to the Datacenter edition, it might make better sense for you from a long-term project type of perspective. All right, so again, pop any questions that you can. Jeremy's forwarding those over to me. Let me see if I can see if there's any questions that have come up. So I've got one question right now about how many licenses are needed for an 8-core 2-proc box. So that is a standard configuration. That's the one that we always talk about, right? So if it's got 2 procs and they each have 8 cores each, you're going to be getting the minimum that you need in order to run that machine. So the calculator will show that as well. And so you will need 16 cores to be licensed. But if you remember, we license these in core packs, 2-core packs. So I basically have to take those 16 cores that need to be licensed, divide that by 2, and so the resulting purchase that I would make from Tech Data are 8 2-core packs. And yes, it is true. I got another question about whether or not standard includes 2 VMs already licensed. Yes. So so in that configuration that I just talked about right now, that bare minimum, I get to run 2 VMs on that box because I've licensed at the very minimum. If I want to add on 4 more VMs, if I want to add on 2 more VMs for a total of 4, I would basically have to double the number of core packs. And again, if you're at 8 cores or less on a server, it's going to be almost exactly the same price as Windows Server 2012 R2. So it's really only the real conversation really only happens once you get to machines that have more cores than 8. So once I get to a 10-core, 10, 12-core port, that's where you're actually going to be paying more money. But as long as it's 8 cores or less, it's almost going to be exactly the same as Windows Server 2012 R2.
Thank you, JJ. We actually have another question. This is more for the Tech Data side. Someone asked if we're going to be sending a PDF of all the slides from the meeting today, and of course the answer is yes. So after webinar today, we'll be able to send out these slides to everyone who attended. So thanks.
And that calculator, that link that you're going to see in the PDF, click on that. I mean, you know, this calculator, it does a very, very good job of figuring out exactly how many you need. Now, again, you know, if all your servers are exactly the same, you just need to run that calculator once, and, you know, and you're able to, you know, you're able to figure it out. But, you know, if you do have multiple servers that have different, you know, processor type configurations, different cores and so forth, you know, you're probably going to have to run this calculator for each of those individual servers. And it's great that it also has, you know, at the bottom over there, you know, how many VMs are you actually running on the machines for the stacking of standard edition, and it makes it quite easy. So this, for any of your procurement folks or any of your sales team members who are trying to figure out how much it's going to cost, or rather not the cost. I mean, the cost isn't listed on here, the pricing listed on here, but the number of the 2 packs you have to purchase. This calculator does a great job.
Any other questions, guys?
Okay, if there's no other questions, if you check on the screen now, it tells you how to contact our Tech Data Microsoft team at microsoft@techdata.com. Our extension to our team is 82031 option 1. If you need some more technical advice from our Tech Data system engineering, you can send your emails to semicrosoft@techdata.com. The extension there, 82031 option 2, and you can speak to one of our 2 system engineers, John Mogling or Marcus Irving. Are there any more questions?
Okay, well, I think with that, we'll go ahead and close off the line for today. So thank you, everyone, for attending. We hope you guys got a lot of information from it, and we'll be reaching out with a PDF of all the slides after the call today. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.